Hi, I'm Colette Bancroft, the book editor at the Tampa Bay Times, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the 2021 virtual Tampa Bay Times Festival of Reading. We'll be taking questions from the audience later in the hour, so please enter your questions in chat for Michael to respond to. Michael Koryta is the New York Times bestselling author of 14 novels, a novella, and multiple short stories. His new book, Where They Wait, is his second horror novel written under the pen name Scott Carson, after 2020's The Chill. One of his thrillers, Those Who Wish Me Dead, published in 2014, was recently made into a movie starring Angelina Jolie and released this year. Before turning to writing novels full-time, Koryta worked as a private investigator and as a newspaper reporter and taught at the Indiana University School of Journalism. He lived in St. Petersburg for 6 years and is on the faculty of Eckerd College's Writers in Paradise Conference. Michael and his wife, Christine, divide their time between Bloomington, Indiana, and Camden, Maine. Welcome back to the festival, Michael. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Are you with us from Camden or Bloomington?
I'm in Camden right now. So it is beautiful here, but we just had the fun of the time change. And that means our sunset is it's just a little bit after 4 o'clock right now. So that has been an adjustment. I guess it's good for the horror novel kind of vibe, though.
Yeah. All that darkness.
Exactly. There you go.
Yep. Well, let's talk about your horror novel and horror novel vibes. Some of your crime novels, like So Cold the River and the Florida set, The Cypress House, have had elements of horror for over the years. But with this novel and the 2020 novel, The Chill, you've jumped kind of pretty fully into the horror genre. What made you decide to take that leap? And why did you write those books under the Scott Carson name?
It's a really good question. Taking the leap to me wasn't necessarily doing something wildly different than what I had done before. As you mentioned, So Cold the River, The Cypress House, and The Ridge is squarely in that supernatural horror kind of vein. But it had been about 10 years, maybe 11 years since I published those books.
Yeah.
And so we got to a point where even when you have a great publisher, a very supportive publisher in your corner, it is admittedly more challenging to publish consistently when the audience doesn't know what genre you're going to be arriving in. And so that was sort of the practical business element. On a more emotional and more fun side, I had always loved the idea of having a pseudonym. Only the way I saw it happening was that it would be a true sort of secret identity to the point that I wouldn't be doing events like this, talking about a Scott Carson book. And I love the idea of trying to see how long I could play it out and people wouldn't know, or see, I mean, how long could you make the run before your cover was blown? And then it turned out that everything that I loved about that, from just kind of a personal amusement level, is maybe not great business. So I was talked out of that pretty swiftly. So I could actually, promote the book, which I understand.
Right. Yeah, I suppose you could have hired an actor to be Scott Carson.
Those were the kind of ideas I really liked. I had the first book under the Carson name, The Chill, is the title from, it goes back to the Ross MacDonald books, the Lou Archer books.
Yes.
And he was, of course, Ross MacDonald was a pseudonym as well. So I was enjoying having kind of playing on the long history we have in crime fiction and supernatural fiction. The book, The Chill, was dedicated. The dedication says, thinking of Thad Beaumont and George Stark. And they are the two sort of alter ego characters in The Dark Half by Stephen King, which is his book about the experience kind of writing as Richard Bachman. So
right. Yeah, he's certainly done the alter ego nom de plume thing, and did make it for a long time, made it work that way.
He famously,
that was him.
Famously got that review where some reviewer referred to, I think it was Thinner, one of the early Bachman books, referred to it as it was like the Stephen King novel, Stephen King wrote novels for thinking people, or it was a dig at Stephen King while complimenting the writer who was really Stephen King, which
Oh, that's sweet.
he had to have enjoyed that. Yes,
I'm sure he did. I can imagine him, cackling.
J.K. Rowling made it for a
Yeah,
little bit too.
She did. Although she got caught out pretty quickly. I mean, people figured out that Robert Galbraith was her. Although she's continued to write under that name, it hasn't stopped her. But she got figured out pretty quick. Can you talk a little bit about King as an inspiration for writing horror, and also as a sort of influence?
Sure. He's an inspiration when it comes to the books, period. I loved his fiction, but his book on writing came out when I was 18 years old.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, it is not hyperbole to say that was a life-changing book for me.
Yeah.
Because this was right in the heart of the time when I'm taking it very seriously, but I also don't really know what I'm doing. At that point, I'm just mimicking, really.
Right.
You have the books that you love, and I was reading Chandler and Hammett, and then Connolly and Lehane and Robert Crace and James Lee Burke, and I was trying to just figure out how all of it was done, and the only way that I really understood how to do that was to essentially try to mimic and steal the approach. And then On Writing came along, and he hits this amazing alchemy in that book where it's both deeply inspirational and removes the mystery. And he respects the art of it, but he also kind of sets that aside and says it's a craft, and it's nuts and bolts, and here's how you go about it. And so that coalesced with a moment when I was learning from a newspaper editor and mentor named, and he came from the sports writing world, but he was giving me Strunk and White and William Zinser's On Writing, On Writing Well, and all of these, very nuts and bolts craft focused books. And then King, who seems, from his force of imagination, just seems like he's on this other planet, comes in and writes On Writing, and you open the book and it's dedicated to William Strunk. And that it couldn't have come along for me at a better moment. And then over the years, he is he supported my work, which is absolutely surreal. There's nothing, I don't know how many, he has weighed in publicly now on a good number of the books, and he's been a champion, and it has never not been surreal to me. It is still a goosebumps experience.
Yeah. He had some kind of direct input into this book, didn't he?
Well, he sent a note while he was reading it and said he was enjoying it, and he mentioned essentially three things that he thought he saw coming. And one of them, I thought I'd hidden fairly well, but of course he had his finger right on it. And the second one, I don't remember as well, but again, he saw it coming. And then the third thing that he said he was looking forward to, which I won't reveal because I might now use it in another book.
Yeah, no.
But he said, I'm very curious about this element, because essentially he was saying he saw a payoff. And I read the email and I thought, I don't have that. I don't pay it off. And it's really good too. What he thought I was going to do was, to my mind, better than what I had done. So even in his just notes of supportiveness and friendship, I'm still learning from him, without question.
As you say, maybe you can make whatever that was work into another book.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I haven't forgotten it.
People are always interested in kind of the genesis of a book, where it starts. And I wonder about the genesis of Where They Wait. What was the spark that set you on to this particular story?
I think ultimately it was the pandemic. So Where They Wait is the only book I've written where it was conceived of and written after things began to go crazy. So I finished a book under the Koryta name called Never Far Away, and I was doing the sort of last revisions of that in the early weeks of lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea for Where They Wait came out of the pandemic, and essentially it had its roots in an article. I don't remember if it was the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but there was a piece fairly early on where there was reference to the surge in mindfulness.
Keep talking. I have to go tell my next door neighbor to turn off the chainsaw.
Okay, I can do that. So there was a surge in mindfulness applications and anti-anxiety applications. You know, the things we download on our phone, and then we outsource our minds and say, I'm going to trust that whoever coded and created this app is both skilled and trustworthy. And out of that moment, we're going to find mental peace. And I was thinking about it, it made a lot of sense, but it also seems so fundamentally susceptible to going wrong. You know, the idea that you're going to trust an app developer without any regulation or testing or research to say, okay, put these tones into my brain and take over. So it was just a question of, you know, what could go wrong? And it seemed like there was a lot there.
Sorry about the interruption. My neighbor chose this week to have his driveway torn out and replaced. And there's a bunch of guys over there right now with like chainsaws and shovels. And
well, it's the appropriate sound backdrop.
It is actually chainsaw kind of, you know, for a horror novel. It's kind of, so anyway, but they say they'll stop till 3. I was interested that the first thing your narrator says in the book is, I was never a dreamer. And by that, he means literally, he doesn't dream. He never dreams at all. We find out later why that is. I had an experience of not dreaming when my husband died a few years ago. And I had always dreamed, and often vividly, but after he died, I did not dream for 6 months. Wow. And at first I just thought I was exhausted, but then it went on, and I got concerned enough that I talked to my doctor about it. And then finally I started to dream again. And I wonder, I know you research your books like crazy. You research everything that goes into the books. And I wonder if that cessation of dreaming is a common response to trauma or to loss.
That's okay. It's very interesting that you mention that and share your own story with it, because I actually found, I guess, sort of a seed of this book while researching Last Words, which was a book about hypnosis. And I was reading about the ways sound and cadence affect memory and the hypnotic state. And somewhere along the lines, it might have been in a book called The Synaptic Self, Joseph Ledoux. I don't remember exactly, but there was reference to a study involving soldiers who had come back from combat zones, and they were going through PTSD, the sort of research, you know, a control group, and their dreaming had stopped. And that was one of the side effects they were looking at. And as I recall, it was, the initial theory was that it might be tied into one of the medications that was being given. But then the competing theory was it's actually the brain protecting itself. Because when you're dreaming, the unconscious is more, it's so emotionally acute. And it's a way of coping, but it's not, when you think about dreams, for the most part, dreams are not gentle. They're very visceral. And I mean, with both a nightmare, it can be a terrifying thing, but I've had some dreams. So thinking about dreams of people I've lost, and it's so vivid. It's like you're having that moment with them again, and it can be truly very sad to awaken and realize that that's gone.
Right.
So it was that idea of, and Nick Bishop, my character in Where They Wait, he has had war zone experience and trauma. but is specific to the loss of his father. It's like
Mhm.
he has no memories of this incident where he lost his father. And that was tracking with the research I had done in Last Words.
Mhm.
So it was one of those things that I thought I would use in Last Words,
Yeah.
and it didn't fit the
Mhm.
book, but I never forgot about it.
Mhm.
So it was right there when I wanted the first line of this book. It was right there. I was never a dreamer, just for the
Yeah.
reasons that you're discussing.
Yeah. And of course, it becomes a really important element in the plot,
Right.
of this book. I'm not going to spoil it, but yeah. And when I did finally start to dream about again, it was the first dream I remembered was a dream about my husband. And
Yeah.
it was one of those dreams that was that was bittersweet.
Yep.
And that sort of like was breaking through that dam. So
Yeah.
it was interesting to me to think about it. I hadn't thought about, I wonder if this happens to other people. I don't know why. But.
Yeah. And for how long? I mean, so I've always, my entire life, I've dreamed every night and vividly, and I remember that.
Mhm.
And apparently that is somewhat unique to
Mhm.
always remember dreams
That much, yeah.
upon waking. Um, a lot of people remember dreams, maybe a couple nights a week, but
Mhm.
in that initial, say 30 minutes after I wake up, I could always tell you I could catalog the bizarre craziness.
Right.
But then I learned that was sort of unusual, in its own regard. I've never gotten any good material out of it. So I know we talked about Stephen King. I know he's gotten books out of dreams. Lehane had a crucial element of Shutter Island come to him in a dream.
Oh, yeah.
There are lots of writers who have mentioned these stories of getting good material out of a dream. And I've had a lot of nights where I wake up at 3 a.m. thinking, I have to remember that because it's really good. And sometimes I've even written things down. I grab the notepad, write it down.
Right.
But in the morning when I go back and look at it, it's always something absolutely crazy, even by my standards of writing. Nothing has stuck yet.
Uh-huh. Maybe it will. Maybe it will. In my review, I said that I kept wanting to yell at Nick. And when when you watch horror movies and you say, don't go in there, don't go in the basement, I kept wanting to yell at him, throw away the phone. And it's interesting to me that you sort of took one of our most ancient fears, the idea of being haunted. And I don't want to say too much about that, but there are hauntings in this book. And one of our kind of newest fears, the idea of technology that escapes our control. And you brought them together. What's scarier? The idea that an app like a mindfulness app like the one in the book could be used to manipulate our brains in various ways, or the idea that even if we know that's happening, we wouldn't throw away our phone?
I think it's the latter. I mean, obviously, what I'm trying to do is, as you say, I'm trying to weave the new fear and the old one together, because I think in that intersection, we have maybe the more interesting comment on human nature, which is innovation races along and it brings us great things, and then it brings us destruction.
Mhm.
And that's really all up to the individual who holds that new thing. Whether it's the atomic bomb or fire, there's the ability to use it for good or for destruction. And so I wanted the modern technology of the phone to sort of reflect that. But I think the more chilling element, which again goes back to just human nature across the centuries, is when we have something that we know can cause us harm and we return to it.
Yeah.
And in that way, we love to cover new technology, whether it's Facebook or the iPhone or whatever it is. We love to cover it as if it's a new threat that somehow is stronger than us. And oftentimes I feel like we remove the idea of willpower and the consistency from the equation there, which is, you know, if you're a drinker, you can probably go back and point to a night where you have a bad memory associated with drinking. You said something you regret, you woke up with a headache, whatever it is, and there are different extremes there. But a lot of people go back to that, you know, it's not, well, that was dangerous. It's a full stop. You can say that with medication. You can say that with any human vice. So I was just thinking about the addictive nature that we have, and then our willingness to say, the confidence, the hubris of saying, no, I'm in control here.
Yeah, I can handle
I learned from Friday night, and therefore, you know, Monday night won't be like that.
Mhm.
So there's something very universal in that I wanted to tap into it, but not go back and hit the nail so clearly on the head that it began to feel like an addiction book.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it casts its net wider than that, certainly. You also saw, you wrote, as you say, you published 2 books during 2021. This one and
Never Far Away was
Never Far Away.
Michael Koryta, yeah.
Right, which was, yes, under your own name. But you also saw the release of that movie, Those Who Wish Me Dead, based on one of your earlier books. And what was the whole movie making experience like? How involved were you? And also, what was that experience like in particular during a pandemic year?
The filming, I was fortunate. I was fortunate in many regards just because they got it done.
Mm-hmm.
They had done the bulk of the shooting, you know, the year before, and I was able to go out to see some of the shooting on location in New Mexico and have that experience. The film was certainly hurt by the pandemic. They had planned reshoots that they weren't able to do. There were elements there that they lost that could have made for a better movie, I think. And I think at a point, the studio, as a movie that had been conceived with big stars and big effects, as it became clear that no one knew what the theater environment would look like, I think they dialed back on some spending there that probably could have made for a better movie. And it was a movie built for the big screen, and I don't think many people saw it on the big screen. But all of that said, you know, I was incredibly fortunate to see it through.
Mm-hmm.
The release was certainly different. You know, I've had a lot of things optioned over the years. I've had some scripts get right down to the goal line.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always the thing that happened to shift, and it hadn't been made. And then this one, I remember in 2019, I'm thinking, we finally got it across the goal line. And so I'll get to have the red carpet experience with Angelina Jolie and Tyler Perry and, you know, all the big stars in there. And then along comes the global pandemic, and that eludes me. But I did have, so my experience of watching the release was in a incredibly small theater in Western Maine that I was able to rent with a small group. And, you know, everybody was vaccinated by then. And we had 8 people, and that was really special to me. It, you know, was not the experience that I had wanted, but it will be a treasured memory. And in some ways, I think it was more unique because I know lots of writers who've had the red carpet experience. And I know one who has released a movie with Angelina Jolie from a theater in Western Maine. And also something really, I haven't talked about this publicly before, but I want to mention it because it was the thing that took that release from maybe a downer of an experience to a really great one. Was Mr. King actually showed up. So he made an appearance, and that was, you know, talk about humbling. He's had so many things made. I'm sure he has missed his own premieres for stuff.
It's like, another premiere.
Exactly. You can only go to so many, right? So the fact that he made that gesture and appeared meant the world to me.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a really terrific thing for him to do. Is there anything else in the works for the screen?
So just this week, we had an announcement, So Cold the River, which was,
Oh, yeah.
again, squeezed in just ahead of, I think they stopped filming something like 9 days before lockdown began. That has been sold and should be out next year.
Right.
Very different kind of movie.
Yeah.
We go from the huge budget,
Mhm.
megastar with Those Wish Me Dead to kind of a funky lower budget indie movie that was all shot in an extremely bizarre and beautiful hotel.
So
But I
they
really,
location,
yeah, it was all shot at the West Baden Springs Hotel, and it's
right?
I love it. Talented writer, just talented cast and crew, and
Mhm.
it was really nice to be around that kind of experience. I
Yeah.
see how they pull off a movie on that kind of restriction was amazing.
Mhm. Good. I look forward to that. That's one of my favorites of your books, and that's really a ghost story in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that was my first I had wanted to write that location for years
Mhm.
because it has this crazy history where, for 20 years it was a boom town in the middle of nowhere,
Mhm.
and built on this idea of sort of a mystical healing water. And they created this hotel that was, I think, for 75 years, it was the largest freestanding dome in the world. And then the stock market crashed, the bottom fell out, and it was closed. It was a ruin for decades, and then they restored it. And I expected to write a crime novel set down there, but every time I walked in the place, it has that feeling to me, like the Vinoy or the Don, where you go in and you just feel the past
Right.
so
Right.
present. It's
Mhm.
hard to set something there and not think ghost story.
Mhm. Not acknowledge that. Yeah. Speaking of the Vinoy and places like that, you're going to be back in St. Petersburg, all things, willing, in January. You're a veteran of many years of the Writers in Paradise conference at Eckerd College, and of course, last year that had a kind of virtual version, but wasn't the conference that it usually is, and it's set this year to take place in person. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about Writers in Paradise and about how you're feeling about being able to come back.
I am really hoping Florida, you need to put on your masks and not screw it up, because I really, really would love to have the experience of being in person there again.
Mhm.
I came down as a student the first year. I guess it was the second year of the conference. First year I was there.
Wow.
And no, I was there the first year. I actually was. And I was in Dennis Lehane's workshop, that's why I went down there. The idea that he was teaching any place just kind of blew my mind. And I had an amazing week. It really was just an incredible learning experience. And I should mention, I also met my wife in that workshop. So, it had some staying power beyond the conference, but it's a phenomenal time to work with some truly world-class faculty. You've got Andre Dubus III, you've got Ann Hood, Laura Lippman,
Mhm.
Stuart Onan. I mean, it's an incredible group. And then if you can't get into their workshops, you can come to mine. So, and I'll do what I can. But on an emotional level, it means a lot to be able to come back this year, because it was one of the last things I did where I was around people before lockdown. And I think the best workshop class I've ever had was that year. So I was coming out of that riding this sort of high of emotional communal energy. And it's unusual as a writer to be around people talking craft like that. And I'm so grateful that we had that, because, 6 weeks later we were done, and
Yeah.
I'm hoping to pick up where we left off.
Yeah. Yeah. That I think everyone is, and I hope so. You're teaching a narrative writing workshop.
Yeah, and narrative suspense, which I love to teach, with the
Yeah.
hope that we get some fiction writers and some nonfiction writers, and it lets me draw on some of the storytelling techniques, obviously from novels, but from my time as a journalist too. I think
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you and I both appreciate the incredible newspaper writers we've
Mhm.
been around over the years. So it's a
Yeah.
lot of fun to teach.
Yeah, it was interesting to me that you made Nick, the narrator of this book, made him a newspaper reporter, a freshly laid off from his job newspaper reporter.
It's also the first time since the early Lincoln Perry books that I've written in first person.
Right.
And I think one of the reasons I kind of ended up there, it wasn't conscious at the time, but Nick felt very, very resonant to me in terms of the way the way things could have gone for me. Had I stayed in journalism, it was I had a pretty good job offer at a time when newspapers were still, things were changing, but the personnel bleed hadn't started yet.
Right.
And when I
Yeah.
look back at that now, it seems entirely possible to me that what would have been a great out of the gates opportunity would have ended with me being laid off as everybody, the industry began to go through all of their mergers and staff reductions. And
Mhm.
I know obviously you're aware of so many really good writers and photographers who lost their jobs in the last few years.
Right.
So I thought honestly I would probably write more about the industry,
Mhm.
and it drifted away from that, but
Mhm.
it's an industry that is near and dear to my heart. So
Yeah. 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 He sort of plunges into other things pretty quickly, but the beginning of the book does talk about that, and it was
my
interesting to me
my
that.
first pass at the opening chapter was probably more dire and depressing than anything that made the book. And my editor kind of weighed in early with a gentle reminder of, we want people to want to take this ride. And I was so buried in Nick's experience with
Yeah.
the industry that it was
Uh-huh.
probably a little bit more of a downer.
The haunted newspaper.
There you Yes, very much so.
We've touched on it a little bit back and forth, but how big an impact did the pandemic have on your writing itself? How much did it affect your process of writing and your process of research? Because I know you in the past, for some books you've gone to big cat rescue operations and you've done wilderness survival, programs and things like that. How did it affect that process?
The research is probably where it is most evident,
Mhm.
because I did lose that ability to do the kind of boots on the ground, getting to know strangers and going into this unusual world
Mhm.
element. So, writing about an industry that was familiar to me, and
Mhm.
even though the town's a fictional place, the town in Maine is very familiar to me. So, um, the one thing that kind of snuck in at one point last fall, I went on a backpacking trip with an old friend along the Cutler Coast in Maine,
Mhm.
and that ended up making it in. So it was like the first time I got out of the house, it immediately made the book, which wasn't part of the plan. But
Yeah.
from a process level, it didn't change that dramatically. Although I think looking back, the book is a kind of interesting time capsule
Mm.
of when it was written. I don't put a year on it. I don't address the pandemic. I don't have characters and masks, but I do think there's a paranoia to it. There's a
Right.
claustrophobia and paranoia to it that probably reflects the way I was feeling every day, like a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that tone is definitely there. And even though, as you say, you don't directly refer to the pandemic, it's the book has a small cast of characters. It doesn't, expand outward to a lot of people, and there's that kind of closed in sense about it. And of course, in horror novels, that can be very effective too. So.
I don't think I would have come across the character of his mother
Mm.
written in a different year.
Uh,
He has the relationship with his mother where uh, he can't reach her. They can't communicate on the level that that he's hoping for.
Mhm.
And there's also the element of he returns to his hometown, and obviously he can move around in his hometown, but there is an element from page 1 on of the walls closing in, and a sense of the level of connection he wants to feel with other people
Right.
is no longer there.
Mhm.
And that's where I think it's more of an emotional reflection of the time than it is a
Yeah,
direct.
a literal one. Yeah, yeah. And some books have started to directly address that year, but others have not. It's been interesting to me to watch that process of how writers are addressing it or not addressing it, and it's going to take. I think it's going to take a while for that process to happen.
I was interested I just read Connolly's new one, which is excellent, The Dark Hours.
Right.
And he goes right in. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things Mike does is he's holding a lens up to
Mhm.
the current day and
Right.
experience in the city.
Yeah.
And I think that worked very well for his stuff.
Mhm.
I don't think it's as natural for me.
Mhm.
And in the early chapters, my first draft here, I referred to the pandemic as being the reason, sort of like the death blow to Nick's newsroom,
Mm.
and another round of layoffs coming from the pandemic. And I had the first reference to his mother actually was that he couldn't get in to see her in person if he wanted to,
Mhm.
because she's in an assisted living facility.
Right.
And it was beginning to break down the wall between fiction and reality in a way that it wasn't fun for me.
Mhm.
Um, the best hours of my days back in March and April were when I could go into the fictional world and sort of tunnel away from the news for a little bit.
Right.
And so I ended up pulling back on all of that, and
Mhm.
it sort of floats. There's no reference to time at all.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think it works for a book like this. I think had you continued with that, it would have somehow divided the story, or made it.
That's how it was feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was becoming distracting to, we need the scene with Nick and his old friend,
Yes.
but how am I going to present that? Because then the focus to me becomes the awkwardness of, do we take our masks off? Do we shake hands? It
Mhm.
became this sort of detail element that I was feeling such fatigue with. And I
Mhm.
think most of the world was, that I couldn't do it in the book.
Yeah, I think you almost have to either commit to it fully or work around it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. Um, all right. Shall we take some audience questions at this point? Amy, do we have audience questions for Michael?
We have a few. Okay, I'm going to start with Aaron Mitchell, who says you recently edited a terrific anthology, When a Stranger Comes to Town, and wonders how editing an anthology was different or similar to writing novels.
Thank you, Aaron, for the ringer question. I appreciate it. Reminding me to promote the book that I've failed to promote. So this was actually a great experience. The Mystery Writers of America does an annual anthology as a fundraiser, and 10 stories are selected, 10 winners are selected. And then as guest editor, I was able to invite some writers to participate. We have Michael Connolly in there, S.A. Cosby, Alifair Burke, Lisa Unger, Lori Roy. I hate to forget people, Steve Hamilton, but it's a group I'm really proud of. And the experience of editing it was just great fun, because I'm kicking it to a lot of tremendous writers and seeing where they go with the direction. And I wanted to pick as wide an option as possible. So the theme is simply when a stranger comes to town. And for me, that was full stop, the end. A stranger needed to come to town. That was the only requirement of the story. And it ranges from Steve Hamilton actually has a pandemic related story that he wrote. I mean, it might've been the first week of lockdown, and he banged this thing out, and it will hold up too. I was dazzled by that. And then Joe Hill went in a supernatural direction. Really great stories. So I encourage everyone to please give that a look.
Okay, this isn't a question so much as a nice comment from Sharon Bresson. She says she's at the Festival of Reading years ago, able to listen to you talk about one of your books. She has since read 10 of your books. And as a reader, she loves that you're associated with our area and hopes to see you again in person next year.
Thank you very much. And likewise.
I'll just ask, what's your favorite part of St. Petersburg? Or like, what do you miss about St. Petersburg?
Kawa coffee. That would be, I have that shipped up here just because I miss it so much. We lived kind of in that old Northeast area, and I'm a big proponent of when you get stuck in a story, go for a walk. And I miss the walks along the bay there, and a walk with Kawa coffee, or then stopping by like old Northeast Tavern and sitting with a notebook. I miss a lot of it, honestly. So great people, great friends.
Thanks. Okay, here's another one from Aaron Mitchell. Without spoilers, there are historical aspects to the story where they wait. Are these drawn on true events? Is the question.
I appreciate that question because I always forget to mention it. So the mass exodus of the Acadians, that is sort of a backdrop to the mythology, the folklore element of the book, is very much taken from reality. And it was something I didn't know all that much about until I came across it in research, but it was a brutal genocide and forced deportation that, it creates some of the culture from Louisiana to the Carolinas that we now think of, sort of Cajun or Creole culture, goes back to Acadians who were taken from their homes and had villages burned. And there was one that stood out to me as a particularly horrific story, and that was disease developed on these ships, and the colonists in Massachusetts they were afraid of disease coming from the ships to shore, and so the sick ships were forced to overwinter. They called it staying out at sea on the North Atlantic. This is 400 years ago. And not surprisingly, the mortality rate was pretty appalling. So I wasn't aware of all of that history, and I wanted to try to fold that in.
It's very cool. Yeah. Okay. Did you
That's
want to ask something, Colette?
Stuff in the book. Go ahead.
Oh, if you wanted to build on that, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say that those passages are some of the most horrifying stuff in the book, Yeah.
It seems it's a disturbing kind of rule that I feel like the scariest stuff I've ever written is probably taken directly from some element of, history or fact.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then there's a conversation over the books of craft that you mentioned, and somebody missed the title, but then someone else filled it in. But I wanted to ask about that because the screen glitched when you said the name of the journalist that you started with, someone who was giving those books to you. And
so his name was Bob Hamill, and the town where the book takes place is Hamill, Maine. So there's also a Hamill College now, which I take a very intentional shot at Hamill College in the book. I describe its pricey tuition rates, overpriced. And to me, that was a fun wink because I think I got the best writing education I had came absolutely for free, sitting in the basement of my newspaper in Bloomington, Indiana, working with Bob Hamill. So that was a kind of a joke between friends, but he gave me Zinzer's book on writing well, in addition to Strunk and White. And I mean, we talked about so many books on writing, the Paris Review series of interviews with writers. I'm going to leave out so many. A book called The Sound on the Page by Ben Yagoda was very interesting about style. There was Story by Robert McKee. The Three Uses of the Knife by David Mamet. And again, I'm leaving out a bunch of great ones, but Bob was just so supportive. And in terms of, there are two different types of inspiration, I think. There's the emotional inspiration that gets you excited. And then there's the practical inspiration that says, here's how you get better. You know, if you really want this, then here's a tool. And if you find someone who is both of those things, that's a really special experience. And Bob Hamill was that for me. And then Dennis Lehane was that.
Yeah.
You know, coming out of, I did 2 years as a student with Dennis at Writers in Paradise, and phenomenal workshop teacher. But then also it was, I would leave feeling emotionally just on high, but also equipped with new tools. And that's one of the really great things about that conference. He wanted it to be working writers, not year-round academics, and to feel like that. And he really succeeded. Sterling Watson also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish Dennis would start writing novels again.
You and me both. He's doing great. He's, you know,
Yes.
got a show that I'm sure is going to be fantastic. But I've got I'm jonesing for a Lehane novel.
I am too. I'm too.
Okay, this is from Vicky Monaco. She wonders, is there a limit to the application of history or fact? How do you balance too much detail versus complementing the story?
That's a great question. How I do it sloppily and awkwardly. In the first draft, I probably commit to way too much. And I'm completely comfortable with that now, because you sort of figure out your process over time. So I treat it a bit like I would if I had the chance to do a long newspaper story, where it's like, okay, I have time. There isn't a deadline staring me in the face. So I can write 120 inches with the knowledge that I'll need it to be, say, 50 or 60 by the end. But I would much rather write too much and then cut, as opposed to thinking about it early and leaving stuff out that might be really good. So I tend to overdraft and then pare back.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. All right, that's the end of my questions over here.
All right, I realized, Michael, that I forgot to ask you the standard question. What's the next book?
Thank you. The next book is called An Honest Man,
Mm-hmm.
and that will be written under the Michael Koryta name and out sometime next year, probably late summer or early fall.
Mm-hmm.
And the basic setup is we have a guy who lives on an island off the coast of Maine. I'm fascinated by these small island communities that have lasted out here. They're so atmospheric and visually compelling, but then they have sort of their own rules.
Yeah.
And the way outsiders are treated is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
So,
and difficult places to live too.
And very difficult places to live.
That's not Margaritaville. Yeah.
No, it certainly isn't. So he returns to his island home and sees a luxury yacht that's adrift. And he goes out on his little skiff to see what's wrong, boards the boat, and he finds numerous bodies on board. And then he calls it in and he does the right thing. And he's firmly convinced that as long as you do the right thing and you're an honest person, you'll be in good shape. And things after that opening chapter go a little bit sideways for him. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So you're still working on that one?
Working on that one. And then I finished a script rewrite for an adaptation of Never Far Away.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I'm excited about that one.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds good. Yeah. All right. Anything we haven't mentioned that you want to mention?
No, other than thank you so much for doing this. And I can't wait to be back in person. So.
Yes. And I look forward to that too. And I'm hoping to see you in January. I'll remind people that Writers in Paradise, although the workshops are, limited to people who apply for them, Writers in Paradise has readings by its faculty members every night during the week of the conference. And so you can see people like Michael and Laura Lippman. And I think this year, I can see her book back there. Elizabeth Strout is the keynote speaker. Yeah. So they always have a terrific readers program. So keep an eye out for that. And I hope we see you then. I hope we see you back at the festival. And thank you so much. It's a pleasure to talk to you, as always.
Thank you. Always my pleasure. Appreciate it.
And thanks to our audience. Thanks to our able producer, Amy Hollyfield. And remember that the festival concludes tomorrow with a talk with Pulitzer Prize winning novelist Louise Erdrich with her brand new novel, The Sentence. You can sign up for that grand finale at festivalofreading.com. Thanks to everybody and good day.